And we're back with that really clean 67 Bassman. You can see the previous videos, links in the description below. First up, all the grounds were redone to the chassis directly like they were on the pre-65 amps. It's a much more secure thing when the grounds don't rely on the tightness and cleanliness of the transformer mounting hardware. In this next clip, you can see that there's still a transformer mounted ground here. The videos aren't presented in the order that I did the work, but rather more of a narrative structure. Anyway, as this came in, the owner had put in that trim pot, and it looked like they had done a good job, but that pretty solder joint was hiding just a tack soldered connection, no mechanical strength, and that's not good for bias. Bias needs to be really solid. Now, on the trim pot that the owner had used, even though only 2 lugs are used on that trim pot for the circuit, it's good to have all 3. You can see he clipped one of them off. That's bad for 2 reasons. Number 1, it doesn't let you mount the trim pot as securely to the existing bias balance pot with only 2 connections. Number 2, if the wiper fails, you have no bias. With what I do, you have a much more secure connection and you have a bias of some sort even if the wiper fails. So you can see here it's connected to 2 parts. 2 lugs are going to the ground of the shell of that pot. And then there's an actual mechanical connection on that resistor before the resistor is even soldered. So it's not just relying on the solder, though I'm adding some, of course. Next up, you can see here that I changed the phase inverter and output section from the AB165 to the AA864, which is a much quieter, more balanced sounding output section. It's much nicer to play. And if you look at this, you can pretty much figure out what I did. Note that beneath the board, there is 1 moved signal wire and 1 moved ground wire. If you decide to do this, please note that you also have to reverse the wires going to the output jack. Here we have the black going to positive and the green to ground. And you can see here that I flipped them around. I left the ground black wire a little bit extra long, just in case anyone in the future wants to revert that. I also moved the negative feedback wire to the main jack on the right there in the video. In this case, I'm going to remove the auxiliary jack, the external jack, and use that as a position to mount a master volume pot. Now, I've mentioned that the blue Ajax caps in fenders rarely fail or leak. One place that I have seen them fail occasionally and begin to leak DC are these 22 nanofarad 400 volt caps in the phase inverter output on AB165s. If those caps start to leak, it'll throw off your bias because you'll have positive DC where there should only be negative. So to test them, and I do this on all Bassmen that come in, I lift the end up in the air that would normally be connected to the bias, and I temp in a resistor to ground. I usually use a 1 meg. Because if you don't have some resistance to ground, you won't get an accurate measurement of whether there's leakage or not. So here you can see at this plate, I have 243 volts DC. And here where the 1 meg is connected to ground, I have it 0 volts DC. That's what we want. On this next one, where I've not connected the other leg yet, I have 250 volts DC. But without the resistor, I'm measuring anywhere between 1 or 2 volts and a couple hundred millivolts. It decreases as the meter stays there, but you don't get an accurate measurement. But if I connect the resistor, even if it's just pressed in place like you're going to see here, and then I measure that once they're held together, then that fluctuating voltage changes to 0 volts DC. So these caps are good. I can put them back. I don't have to worry about it throwing off the bias. That's great. At this point, everything was pretty good, but there were a couple of little issues. Number 1, when I played really hard, I would get a clamping kind of blocking distortion. And just from having encountered that in the past, I pretty much knew that it was going to be a grid leak resistor that was the fault. It turned out to be the 1 meg grid leaks in the phase inverter. So those have been replaced with some new 1 meg carbon comps, and that behavior is gone. You can see the twisted cloth-covered wire going to the master volume pot. Kind of replicates what was in there, even if it's not at all period correct. The other issue I found was this 250 picofarad treble cap in the normal channel. That cap had drifted and was no longer 250 picofarad, it was about 150. So the amp did not have the right treble response. That's been changed out for a new Vichet. And the channel is behaving correctly. So now I'm going to let you hear a little bit of the finished amp. You'll get a real playing video later. In this, I'm just checking each channel. I'm using a lot of the guitar volume and pickup selections to make the difference. The front panel knobs aren't touched all that much. You will see and hear when they are. And I'll show you the master volume behavior. Now note that with the bias balance pot, this master volume does not go all the way to 0, but it goes really low, and I think it's still a very musically useful choice.